They say you cannot choose your family, but you can certainly choose the view from your penthouse window while they live with the consequences of their betrayal. I am Jasmine King. I am standing in the center of my living room, the city of Atlanta glowing gold beneath me through floor-to-ceiling glass. In my hand is a glass of Pinot Noir that costs more than my brother-in-law used to make in a month. But my eyes are not fixed on the city lights or the designer furniture. They are locked on the only thing in this room that truly matters. Hanging above the marble fireplace encased in museum-quality glass is a tattered, water-damaged leather booklet from 1965. To the naked eye, it looks like absolute garbage. To my mother, it was something shameful that belonged in a dumpster. When she threw this passbook into the trash can at my grandfather's funeral, she screamed that it should have stayed buried with him. She had no idea she was throwing away $50 million and the deed to the very ground she was standing on. She thought she was erasing our history of poverty. Instead, she was signing her own eviction notice. Before I tell you how I used this little book to dismantle the most arrogant people in my life, I want to know where you are watching from in the comments below. And hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who ended up owning the whole farm. Trust me, the payoff involving my brother-in-law in handcuffs is something you do not want to miss. It all began 3 years ago on a Tuesday that felt hotter than the deepest circle of hell. The air inside St. Jude's Chapel was suffocating. The building's air conditioning had failed that morning, leaving the room heavy with the nauseating scent of aggressive white lilies mixed with the damp wool of cheap suits. I hate lilies. To me, they do not smell like peace or reverence. They smell like a desperate attempt to mask the scent of decay, and that is exactly what my family was doing that day. They were rotting from the inside out, hiding their greed beneath black silk and fake tears. I sat in the front pew, clutching the hem of my simple navy dress, feeling the sweat trickle down my back. My grandfather Otis lay in the closed casket a few feet away. He was a mechanic, a man with grease permanently stained into his cuticles and a heart made of gold. He hated pretension. He would have hated this spectacle. But I was the only one there who was actually mourning him. Everyone else in that front row was just waiting for the show to end so they could get to the reading of the will. The atmosphere was so thick with anticipation and hidden malice that I could practically taste the metal in the air. I took a deep breath, inhaling that cloying lily scent, not knowing that in less than an hour, the family I thought I knew would show me exactly who they were over a piece of old paper. The drive to Attorney Harrison's office was silent but loud with unspoken greed. My sister Ebony spent the entire 20-minute ride checking real estate listings on her phone, already spending money she had not yet received. My mother Beatrice was busy fixing her makeup in the visor mirror, muttering about how the funeral flowers looked cheap and how she hoped none of her church friends noticed. I sat in the back seat staring out the window, clutching the only thing I had left of my grandfather, a crumpled tissue he had used to wipe grease off his hands the day before he died. Attorney Harrison was a man who looked like he was carved out of the same mahogany as his desk. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked at us with eyes that had seen too many families tear each other apart over pennies. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He knew exactly what everyone in that room wanted, except for me. To my daughter Beatrice, he read his voice dry as dust. I leave the sum of $5,000 with the hope that she finds peace in something other than possessions. My mother's face dropped. 5,000. That would barely cover the catering for the funeral reception she had insisted on hosting. She let out a sharp, indignant huff, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. To my granddaughter Ebony, he continued, I leave my late wife's jewelry collection and the remaining balance of my savings account, totaling $15,000. Ebony squealed, actually squealed, clapping her hands together. Brad, her husband, smirked and leaned back in his leather chair looking satisfied. It was not a fortune, but it was liquid cash, and for people like them, that was all that mattered. Then the lawyer turned his gaze to me. The room went dead silent. To my granddaughter Jasmine, the only one who ever sat with me when I had nothing to offer but stories. I leave the property located at 42 Miller Road and the contents of the shoebox found under my bed. For a second, nobody moved. Then a sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. It was Brad laughing. It was a cruel, barking laugh that bounced off the wood-paneled walls. "The shack," Brad asked, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "He left her the termite farm on the edge of town. Oh, that is rich. That is priceless. Jasmine, congratulations. You are officially the queen of the junkyard." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from anger. Miller Road was where Grandpa had lived for 50 years. It was a small, dilapidated wooden house, yes, but it was his home. Beatrice did not defend me. She did not tell Brad to shut up. Instead, she sighed a sound of pure relief. "Thank God," she muttered, smoothing her skirt. "At least I do not have to pay the demolition fees. That place is an eyesore. It is a stain on this family's reputation. Jasmine, do yourself a favor and burn it down before the city fines you for code violations." Attorney Harrison slid a simple, beaten-up cardboard shoebox across the desk toward me. It looked pathetic sitting next to the velvet jewelry pouch Ebony was already greedily fingering. Brad leaned over his cologne, overpowering the smell of old paper. "Go on, Jasmine," he taunted. "Open it. Maybe he left you his collection of rusted bolts to go with your pile of rotting wood." I took the box. It felt light, almost empty. I did not open it there. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing what was inside. I simply pulled it into my lap, shielding it with my arms as if it were a newborn baby. I did not know yet that the weight of that box was heavy enough to crush everyone in that room. We stepped out of the air-conditioned office of Attorney Harrison, and the humid Atlanta heat hit us like a physical blow. The sun was blinding, reflecting off the asphalt of the parking lot. I could not wait until I got home. My curiosity was burning a hole in my chest. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid of the cardboard shoebox right there on the sidewalk. Inside there was no cash. There were no diamonds. There was just a single small book bound in cracked water-stained leather. It smelled of damp earth mildew and old basements. It was a sharp, pungent odor that immediately clashed with the cloud of expensive Chanel perfume my mother was wearing. Ebony peered over my shoulder, crinkling her nose in disgust, and let out a harsh, mocking cackle. "Is that it? A diary? Did Grandpa leave you his grocery lists from 1980? That is hilarious." Brad lit a cigarette, blowing a stream of gray smoke directly into my face. "Even better," he laughed, shaking his head. "It looks like a moldy Bible. Maybe he wants you to pray for a better life, since he certainly did not leave you the money to buy one." I ignored them and reached into the box to touch the book. It was a bank passbook, the kind they stopped using decades ago. The cover was peeling, revealing gray cardboard underneath. Embossed on the front in faded gold letters was the year 1965. It looked worthless. It looked like trash. And that was exactly the problem. My mother Beatrice froze. Her eyes darted frantically from the dirty book in my hands to Brad's judgmental smirk and then to the few pedestrians walking by. Panic flashed across her face. She was not seeing a keepsake from her father. She was seeing evidence of the poverty she had spent 40 years trying to erase. She saw a dirty, smelly reminder of where she came from, threatening to stain the pristine, wealthy image she had built for her son-in-law. "Give me that!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. Before I could even react, she snatched the box from my hands. Her manicured fingernails dug into my skin, leaving angry, red crescents on my wrist. She did not open the book. She did not check the pages. She did not hesitate for a single second. She marched 3 steps toward a metal public trash can on the corner of the street. "Mom, no!" I yelled, lunging forward to stop her. She ignored me. She hurled the book downward with all the strength in her body. It hit the pile of half-eaten sandwiches, sticky soda cans, and coffee grounds with a heavy, wet thud. That sound echoed in my ears louder than the city traffic. It was the sound of my heart hitting the bottom of a well. "It belongs in the ground!" Beatrice screamed, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and shame. "I will not let you drag this family back into the gutter, Jasmine. Your grandfather was a hoarder and a fool. That book is full of his delusions and gambling debts. It stays buried. Do you hear me? Buried?" Brad flicked his cigarette butt onto the pavement near my feet and laughed, putting a protective arm around Beatrice. "Listen to your mother, Jasmine. Stop embarrassing us in public. Come on, Beatrice. Come on, Ebony. Let us go to Le Bilboquet. I need a stiff drink after smelling that mildew." They turned their backs on me. They walked toward Brad's shiny black Mercedes, without a single backward glance, leaving me standing alone on the scorching pavement, staring at the open mouth of a garbage can that held the only thing my grandfather had left me. I stood frozen on the sidewalk for a moment, the heat radiating off the concrete through the soles of my shoes. The Mercedes engine roared to life behind me, a low guttural growl of expensive engineering, but I did not turn around. My entire world narrowed down to that metal cylinder in front of me. It smelled of rotting fruit, stale beer, and the oppressive decay of the city in August. People walking by gave me a wide berth, their eyes darting between my funeral dress and the garbage can. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and revulsion, thinking I was some desperate woman scavenging for food, or perhaps just crazy with grief. I took a breath, held it, and reached in. My hand brushed against a sticky, crushed soda cup before my fingers curled around the cracked leather of the passbook. It felt cold, despite the heat. I pulled it out. A glob of bright yellow mustard was smeared across the year 1965, covering the faded gold lettering. A woman in a sharp gray business suit wrinkled her nose and audibly gagged as she hurried past me, clutching her purse tighter. "Disgusting," she muttered under her breath, not caring if I heard. I did not care either. I looked at the book in my hand. Without hesitation, I wiped the mustard and grime off with the sleeve of my navy silk dress. The fabric was ruined, stained instantly with grease, but the book was safe. As I cleaned the cover, the rough texture of the leather against my palm triggered a memory so vivid it almost brought me to my knees. I could hear Grandpa Otis's voice in my head, gravelly and warm like an idling engine. He was standing in his garage wiping oil from a carburetor. "Jasmine girl, never judge a nut by its shell," he had said. "The hardest steel comes from the hottest fire, and the best treasure is usually wrapped in the ugliest paper. People throw away diamonds because they look like rocks to the untrained eye. Do not be untrained." He saw value where others saw scrap. He built a life out of things other people discarded. Now I was holding his scrap. I hugged the dirty, foul-smelling book to my chest, closing my eyes for a second to find my center. I did not cry. Tears were for people who were helpless. And for the first time in years, I did not feel helpless. I felt focused. A sharp, aggressive honk startled me back to reality. I looked up. The black Mercedes had not left yet. It had pulled up alongside the curb, idling just a few feet away. The tinted passenger window rolled down smoothly. It was not to offer me a ride. Brad was leaning across Ebony, holding his smartphone up, the camera lens pointed directly at me. "And here we have the family raccoon in her natural habitat," Brad narrated, his voice booming for the entire street to hear. "Digging for gold. Jasmine, did you find a half-eaten burger in there? Make sure to wash your hands before you try to shake hands with anyone important." Ebony giggled from the passenger seat, not even looking at me, her eyes fixed on the phone screen. "Post it, babe," she laughed. "Tag her. The caption should be trash for trash." Brad hit send, laughed one last cruel time, and stomped on the accelerator. The car sped off, leaving a cloud of exhaust fumes that mingled with the stench of the garbage. I watched the taillights disappear around the corner. I stood tall, clutching the passbook. I did not run after them. I did not scream. I simply turned and began the long walk to the bus stop. They thought they had just humiliated me. They did not know they had just documented the beginning of their own end. My apartment was a suffocating box on the 4th floor of a walk-up in the West End. It was nothing like the sprawling estates Brad developed or the manicured lawns of my mother's neighborhood. Here the linoleum peeled at the corners and the air conditioner rattled like a dying engine. But as I locked the door behind me and slid the chain into place, the silence was a blessing. I was finally away from the perfume and the cruelty. I sat at my small, wobbly kitchen table and placed the passbook in the center directly under the single hanging bulb. The yellow light cast long shadows across the cracked leather cover. It still smelled faintly of the garbage can, a lingering reminder of my mother's hatred. I took a damp cloth and gently wiped away the last of the grime, treating the object with the reverence of a holy relic. Grandpa Otis had left me this specific box. He had bypassed my mother, bypassed Ebony, and trusted me. There had to be a reason. He was not a man who did things by accident. I opened the cover. The spine crackled the sound of paper that had not breathed in decades. The first page was blank, save for a stamp in red ink that had faded to a rusty brown. It was not a bank logo. It was a symbol I did not recognize, a triangle inside a circle with the letters TLT. I turned the page. I expected to see deposit slips. I expected to see small withdrawals for groceries or auto parts. Instead, I saw columns of handwriting, Grandpa's handwriting. But they were not dollar amounts. There were no currency symbols, no decimal points for cents, just strings of numbers that made no sense at first glance. 33.7490, 84.3880. I frowned, tracing the numbers with my finger. These were not savings. These looked like math equations. I grabbed my laptop and typed the first string of numbers into the search bar. My heart hammered against my ribs as the results loaded. A map appeared. A satellite view of the riverfront district, specifically the undeveloped marshland right next to the city's booming downtown. I sat back, my breath catching in my throat. I looked at the next line in the book. It was not a deposit. It was a date. October 12, 1965, and next to it, a code Class B bearer share. My archivist training kicked in. I knew what this was. In the 60s, especially in the South, it was nearly impossible for a black man to buy prime commercial real estate without being blocked, threatened, or cheated. So they formed trusts, silent partnerships. They bought land through shell companies and used bearer shares, physical documents that proved ownership to whoever held them. The realization washed over me like ice water. Grandpa Otis was not hoarding trash. He was hiding an empire. He had bought land when it was worthless swamp, knowing that one day the city would expand. And he had hidden the proof in the one place he knew my bourgeois, superficial mother would never look. Inside a dirty, ugly book. I looked around my tiny, crumbling apartment. I looked at the eviction notice taped to my refrigerator. Then I looked back at the book. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of discovery. My family thought I was the loser who inherited the garbage. They had no idea I was holding the keys to the kingdom. But I needed to be sure. I needed verification. And I knew exactly where to go to get it. The First National Trust Bank downtown was built like a fortress designed to keep people like me out. It was a cathedral of old money constructed from limestone and intimidation, with pillars wider than my entire apartment building. I smoothed down my faded jeans and adjusted my plain white t-shirt. I had deliberately chosen not to dress up. If Grandpa Otis was right about what was hidden inside this book, I did not need to wear a costume to command respect. Real power does not need to shout. I walked through the revolving brass doors and the air conditioning hit me instantly. It was silent inside. The kind of silence that costs money. The floor was polished marble that reflected the chandeliers above, and the air smelled of crisp currency and expensive hand sanitizer. I clutched the passbook tighter to my chest. It felt heavy against my heart. I approached the third teller window. The nameplate read, Mrs. Gable. She was a woman in her 50s with stiff blonde hair that did not move and rimless glasses perched on a sharp nose. She was counting a stack of $100 bills with a rhythmic precision that suggested she loved the money more than people. When she saw me standing there, she did not smile. She stopped counting and sighed loudly, as if my presence alone had lowered the property value of the building. "Can I help you?" she asked, without looking up. Her tone suggested she doubted I could even read the withdrawal slip, let alone have an account here. I placed the passbook on the polished marble counter. It looked even worse here against the pristine white stone. The leather was dark and cracked, and the faint smell of the dumpster still clung to it. Mrs. Gable recoiled. She physically took a step back and wrinkled her nose in undisguised disgust. "We do not accept trash here," she said, her voice dripping with condensation. "If you are looking for the recycling center, it is 3 blocks east. Please remove this item from my counter before I call the janitor." I felt a flash of heat crawl up my neck. My mother would have apologized and run away in shame. My sister would have started a screaming match. I did neither. I channeled every ounce of Grandpa Otis's quiet strength. I slid the book closer to her until it touched the edge of her keyboard. "I am not looking for a recycling center," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I am here to verify a holding. Please enter the account number on page 2. She laughed. It was a short, dry sound like dry leaves crinkling. "Honey, this is a legacy branch. We do not handle moldy books from the civil rights era. The system will not even recognize this. I am going to have to ask you to leave before I call security. You are disturbing the atmosphere." There was no one else in line. It was just me, her, and the prejudice she wore like a badge of honor. "Call them," I challenged, looking her dead in the eye. "Call the police, call the manager. Call the president for all I care. But before you do that, type the numbers, unless you are incompetent and unable to perform a simple data entry task." Her eyes narrowed into slits. The insult to her competence stung more than anything else. She snatched the book up with 2 fingers as if it were contagious. "Fine," she hissed. "I will enter it so the system can reject it, and then you can get out of my bank." She opened the book, avoiding the stained cover, and began to type the code, violently striking the keys with her acrylic nails. Click, click, click. She hit the enter key with a flourish, crossing her arms and waiting for the error message that would prove her right. I held my breath and watched the screen. The computer screen did not beep. It did not display a simple error message. Instead, the entire monitor flashed a violent, pulsating red. A low mechanical hum began to vibrate through the marble counter, a sound so deep I felt it in my teeth. Suddenly, the heavy brass locks on the main revolving doors slammed shut with a deafening crack that echoed through the lobby. Metal security shutters began to descend over the windows, blocking out the sunlight and sealing us inside. Mrs. Gable jumped back as if the keyboard had burned her. Her shock quickly morphed into a smug, predatory grin. She looked at me with pure malice, pointing a shaking finger in my face. "I knew it," she announced, her voice echoing in the sudden silence of the bank. "Fraud. This system is linked to the federal database. You just tried to access a frozen or stolen account with a fake passbook. Security, detain this woman immediately." 2 armed guards near the entrance placed their hands on their holsters and began to walk briskly toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked around, feeling the walls closing in. I thought about my mother. I thought about how right she would think she was when she saw me on the news in handcuffs. I took a half step back, raising my hands, slowly preparing to be tackled. But before the guards could reach me, the heavy oak door behind the teller counter flew open with a force that banged it against the wall. A man in an immaculate charcoal suit sprinted out. He was not walking. He was running, his polished shoes slipping slightly on the marble floor. This was Mr. Sterling, the branch manager. I had seen his picture on the wall. He looked terrified. His face was pale, beads of sweat standing out on his forehead. "Mr. Sterling," Mrs. Gable shouted, looking delighted. I caught her. "She tried to use a forge." "Shut up," Mr. Sterling bellowed, his voice cracking. He did not even look at her. He shoved past the security guards, waving them off frantically. "Stand down. Get back, do not touch her." The guards froze, confused. Mrs. Gable's mouth fell open. her finger still pointing at me. Mr. Sterling skid to a halt directly in front of me. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. I braced myself for an interrogation. I expected him to demand who I was or where I stole the book. Instead, he did something that made the entire room go dead silent. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and then bent at the waist. He bowed. It was not a nod. It was a full 90-degree bow of absolute deference, the kind you give to royalty. He held the position for a long, uncomfortable 5 seconds before slowly rising to meet my eyes. He looked at me with an expression of total awe. "Ms. King," he whispered, his voice trembling with reverence. "We have been waiting for this code to be activated for 50 years. Please forgive my staff. They do not know who you are. They do not know that you own the ground we are standing on." Mr. Sterling ushered me into his private suite, a room that smelled of mahogany and silence far removed from the judgmental eyes in the lobby. He dismissed the security guards with a sharp wave of his hand and locked the heavy oak door behind us. He did not sit behind his massive desk. Instead, he pulled a chair close to mine, placing the tattered passbook on a velvet cushion as if it were the crown jewels. His hands were trembling slightly as he opened it to the page with the code. "Ms. King." He began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You need to understand why my teller was confused. This is not a savings account. This is a Class B bearer share portfolio. In 1965, black men like your grandfather could not buy prime commercial real estate in this city without risking their lives or having the deeds stolen. So Otis King and a group of investors formed a silent land trust. They bought the marshlands on the edge of town, the useless dirt nobody wanted." I stared at him, my throat dry. I knew Grandpa bought land, but I thought it was just the plot under his shack. Sterling shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "It is not useless anymore, Ms. King." The city expanded. That marshland is now the River District. It is the exact location where the new stadium is built and where the new luxury high-rises are being planned. This book does not hold cash. It holds the deed rights. Whoever physically holds this book owns 40% of the land underneath the city's most expensive development projects. He stood up and walked to a safe in the wall. He spun the dial and retrieved a single sheet of paper, placing it gently in front of me. It was a valuation report dated this morning. I looked at the bottom line. The number was so long it required 2 commas. $52 million. The room suddenly felt very small. The air conditioner hummed, but I could not hear it over the rushing of blood in my ears. $50 million. My mother had thrown $50 million into a public trash can because it smelled like mildew. She had thrown away an empire because she was worried about what her son-in-law would think. I reached for the crystal glass of water Sterling had poured for me. My hand shook so violently that water sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the expensive Persian rug. I could not stop shaking. It was not fear. It was the physical shock of vindication. "Are you all right?" Sterling asked, looking concerned. I took a sip, the cold water grounding me. "I am better than all right, Mr. Sterling." I looked up at him, my eyes hardening. "Does anyone else know about this?" "No," he replied. "Because it is a bearer share. The identity of the owner is anonymous until the book is presented. As far as the city developers know, they have been trying to find the owner of the Otis Trust for a decade. They think the owner is dead." I set the glass down. A plan was already forming in my mind, sharp and cold. Good. Let them keep thinking that. Specifically, I need you to keep this quiet from a developer named Brad Wilson. He is about to break ground on a project called Riverside Luxury. Sterling raised an eyebrow. "Wilson. He is building on Lot 42. That is your land, Ms. King. He does not have the title." I know I said, a smile finally touching my lips. "Let him build. Let him spend every dime he has. And when he is finished, I will come to collect my rent." While I was sitting in the quiet safety of Mr. Sterling's office across town, my brother-in-law was choking on his afternoon scotch. Brad Wilson sat in his corner office on the 32nd floor of the Skyline Tower. He liked to look down on the city he was trying to buy piece by piece. His desk was made of imported glass, and his ego was made of pure delusion. He was busy admiring the architectural renderings for Riverside Luxury, the pet project that was supposed to make him millions and cement his status as a titan of industry. The drawings showed gleaming glass towers rising from the marshlands, erasing the history of the people who lived there. But then his intercom buzzed. It was his lead attorney, a nervous man named Cohen who always sweated profusely when he had to deliver bad news. Brad clicked the speakerphone button, fully expecting to hear that the final permits were approved. Instead, Cohen's voice was shaking so hard it distorted the audio. "Mr. Wilson, we have a major problem," Cohen stammered. "The city just flagged the permit application for Lot 42. They issued a complete stop work order, effective immediately." Brad slammed his expensive crystal tumbler onto the desk, spilling amber liquid over the blueprints. "What do you mean stop work? I paid off the zoning commissioner last month. I took him to dinner. I bought his wife a bracelet. Who is stopping us?" "It is not the zoning board, sir," Cohen replied. "It is the title office. A red flag just popped up in the archives. There is a cloud on the deed. It seems the land isn't unclaimed city property like we assumed. It belongs to a private holding called the Otis King Land Trust." Brad froze. The name hung in the air like smoke. Otis King. He knew that name. He had just watched his wife bury the man yesterday. He had just watched his mother-in-law throw the man's legacy into a trash can while he laughed. Otis King. Brad laughed a sound of pure disbelief. That old mechanic. He did not own anything but a rusted toolbox and a termite-infested shack. "Cohen, are you telling me a dead man is blocking my $50 million development?" "Technically, yes," Cohen said. "The records show an active bearer share claim from 1965. It is an ironclad land trust. Until we clear this title, not a single shovel hits the dirt. If the owner surfaces, they own the ground rights to the entire sector. We need to acquire that property interest immediately, or the investors will pull their funding by Friday." Brad's mind raced. He did not know about the passbook. He did not know about the bearer shares I had just verified. All he knew was that the lawyer had read the will. Jasmine had been left the house at 42 Miller Road. In his arrogant, narrow mind, he connected the dots incorrectly. He thought the trust was just a fancy legal name for the rotting shack I inherited. He thought I was sitting on a pile of wood that happened to be physically in his way. He did not realize I owned the earth itself. He smiled, leaning back in his leather chair, the panic fading into a predatory calm. He thought he had the upper hand. He thought I was just a broke, grieving girl who would jump at any scrap of cash he threw my way. "Do not worry about the investors, Cohen." Brad said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "I know exactly who has the rights. It is just my wife's charity case of a sister. She is desperate and broke. I will handle this personally. I will invite her over for a family dinner. By the time dessert is served, I will have that property signed over to me for pennies on the dollar." He hung up the phone and swiveled his chair around to look at the river, planning his victory. He had no idea he was planning his own funeral. My phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter, buzzing aggressively against the cheap laminate. I looked at the screen. The name flashing back at me was simply Beatrice. Not Mom. Just Beatrice. I had changed it in my contacts the moment she let go of that box over the trash can. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow sip of my tea, savoring the control. They never called me. Not unless they wanted a free babysitter for Ebony's Yorkie or needed someone to blame for a family failure. I swiped answer and put it on speaker. "Jasmine, baby. Is that you?" The voice that filled my tiny kitchen was unrecognizable. It was high-pitched, dripping with synthetic sweetness, the kind of tone she used when she was trying to charm a deacon at church or return a dress she had already worn. It was a complete 180-degree turn from the shrieking banshee at the funeral. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice flat. Oh, stop with the Beatrice nonsense. She laughed, a nervous tinkling sound. I am your mother. Look, honey, I am calling because we all feel just terrible about yesterday. Simply terrible. Grief does strange things to people, you know. We were just so overcome with emotion about your grandfather passing that we were not ourselves. Brad, especially. He feels sick about how he spoke to you. I almost choked on my tea. Brad Wilson did not have the capacity to feel sick about anything other than a dip in the stock market. If he was apologizing, it meant he was desperate. And if he was desperate, it meant the stop work order had hit his desk. He wants to make it right, Beatrice continued, not waiting for a response. We are having a family dinner tonight at the estate. Just a small, intimate gathering. We want you to come. We want to welcome you properly. Ebony is even making her famous cheesecake. Ebony did not bake. Ebony bought frozen cakes and transferred them to glass platters. But I did not point that out. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the passbook, which was now safely locked in a fireproof box on my counter. I knew exactly what this was. This was not an olive branch. It was a bear trap. They thought I was the same Jasmine they could bully into submission. They thought they could dazzle me with their crystal glasses and heated floors, feed me a few scraps of affection, and then manipulate me into signing over the rights to the shack on Miller Road. They were inviting the sheep to dinner so they could shear her. They just did not realize the sheep had grown fangs overnight. I would love to come, I said, allowing a hint of naive gratitude to seep into my voice. I really didn't want us to fight over Grandpa's things. Wonderful Beatrice exhaled the relief audible. Come at 7. And dress nice, sweetie. We want to take a family photo. I hung up the phone. A cold smile spread across my face. I would dress nice, all right. I would dress like the CEO of the company that owned their future. I was going to walk into the lion's den not to be eaten, but to see exactly how much their teeth were worth before I pulled them out one by one. The game was on. The iron gates of Brad's estate swung open slowly, groaning under the weight of pretension. I drove my beat-up sedan up the winding driveway, parking next to a fleet of leased luxury cars that I knew were one missed payment away from repossession. The house loomed ahead, a monstrosity of glass and steel that looked more like an Apple store than a home. It was designed to impress strangers, not to shelter a family. I took a deep breath, checked the recorder in my pocket to ensure it was running, and stepped out. The evening air was warm, but the moment the heavy front door opened, a blast of aggressively chilled air hit me. Ebony stood in the doorway, blocking my path like a gatekeeper to a club I never wanted to join. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my car, but it hung on her frame awkwardly, as if even the fabric wanted to be somewhere else. You made it, she said, her voice tight. We were worried you might get lost. I know you are not used to this side of town. I smiled, stepping past her into the foyer. It smelled of bleach and desperation. The floors were polished so high I could see my reflection distorted and stretched. Before I could even say hello, Ebony thrust a bright orange handbag into my face. Do you like it? She asked, her eyes manic. It is the new season, Hermes. Brad bought it for me this morning to cheer me up after the funeral drama. It is strictly limited edition. I looked at the bag. It was beautiful, certainly. But I also knew the rumor around town was that Brad's credit cards were so maxed out they were practically smoking. This bag wasn't a gift. It was a distraction. It was a bribe to keep her happy while their financial foundation crumbled. It is very orange, I said neutrally. Ebony pulled it back, clutching it defensively. It is sunset tangerine jasmine. But I suppose I cannot expect you to know that. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a familiar sneer. Is that what you are wearing to dinner? I mean, I know you are grieving, but that dress looks like something Grandma would have worn to bingo. She laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the high ceilings. I smoothed the fabric of my simple black dress. Yesterday that comment would have stung. Yesterday I would have felt small. But today, standing in this mausoleum of debt, I just felt a strange sense of pity. I prioritized comfort tonight, I replied calmly. I figure we are all family here, right? No need to put on a show. Ebony narrowed her eyes, sensing a shift in me but unable to place it. She flipped her hair, turning on her heel. Well, try not to spill anything on the furniture. Everything here is custom imported Italian silk. Come on. Brad is opening a bottle of wine that is probably older than you. I followed her into the living room, my heels clicking on the marble. I watched her strut, so confident in her illusion of wealth. She thought she was the queen of the castle. She had no idea she was giving a tour of the Titanic to the iceberg. The dining room was a theater set designed for a play about happiness that nobody knew the lines to. We sat at a mahogany table long enough to land a plane on. Brad sat at the head naturally. I was placed on his right, the guest of honor, or perhaps the prisoner of war. Dinner was Wagyu beef seared to perfection and served on plates that likely cost more than my first car. Brad stood up, holding a dusty bottle of Cabernet like a weapon. He moved around the table to my glass, pouring the dark red liquid with theatrical flair. "Drink up, Jasmine," he said, flashing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "This is a '96 vintage. You cannot get this at the corner store. I wanted to open something special to celebrate having the whole family back together." I watched the wine swirl in the glass. I did not drink it. I picked up my knife and fork, slicing into the meat. It was tender, melting away under the blade, but my appetite was gone. Beatrice cleared her throat. She was sitting opposite me, picking at her salad, as if the calories were personally attacking her. She reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine, but never actually making contact. "You know, Jasmine, seeing you here just warms my heart. It really does. I have been doing so much praying since the funeral. I realized that Satan was trying to use your grandfather's death to drive a wedge between us. And we cannot let that happen. We simply cannot." I chewed slowly, swallowing the rich meat before looking at her. "You threw his belongings in the trash, Beatrice. I do not think that was Satan. I think that was you." Beatrice let out a breathless, airy laugh, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, stop it. You know how I get when my blood sugar is low." And with the heat, I was hysterical with grief. I was not thinking clearly. But that is the beauty of family, isn't it? We forgive. We move on. Because at the end of the day, strangers do not care about you. The world is a cold, hard place. The only people who will ever truly have your back are sitting at this table right now. She looked at Brad and Ebony for confirmation. Ebony nodded vigorously, her mouth full of potatoes. "Exactly," Ebony said. "Like, remember when you broke your arm in 3rd grade? Who drove you to the hospital? Mom did. We have always been there for you, Jasmine, even when you push us away with your independence." Beatrice smiled, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. "Your grandfather would want this. He would want us to pool our resources. He would want the strong to help the less fortunate. That is why we invited you here. We want to help you, Jasmine. We hate seeing you struggle in that awful apartment. We want to lift you up to our level." The gaslighting was masterful. In 3 minutes, she had rewritten history, minimized her cruelty, and framed their predation as charity. I took a sip of water to wash down the taste of their lies. I knew the pitch was coming. They had buttered the bread. Now they were about to serve the poison. Brad wiped his mouth with the linen napkin and dropped it onto his plate, a signal that the performance of a happy family dinner was officially over. The room temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. He snapped his fingers at Ebony, who reached under her chair and produced a sleek silver aluminum briefcase. She slid it across the mahogany table until it rested just inches from my untouched plate. The sound of the metal scraping against the wood was sharp and intrusive. Brad reached over and unlatched the case. The lid popped open to reveal neat, tight stacks of $100 bills. The smell of fresh ink and paper wafted up, mixing with the scent of the expensive wine. Beatrice gasped theatrically, pressing a hand to her chest, as if she had never seen money before, even though I knew she had likely helped count it. $50,000, Brad announced, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who believes everyone has a price. Tax-free, unmarked, yours to keep. I looked at the money. To anyone else, it might have looked like a fortune. To me, it looked like bait. "What is this for, Brad?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Brad laughed, swirling his wine glass. "Consider it a rescue package, Jasmine. I want to buy that termite-infested shack your grandfather left you. Let us be honest. That place is a safety hazard. The city is probably going to condemn it any day now. But I am a generous guy. I can use the land for material storage for my new development. I need a place to park dump trucks and stack lumber." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine, trying to intimidate me. "You are drowning, Jasmine. I see the way you dress. I see that car you drive. You are struggling. This money can change your life. You can pay off your debts. You can move into a decent apartment. You can finally stop embarrassing the family with your poverty. All you have to do is sign the deed transfer." Ebony chimed in, her eyes glued to the cash. "Just take it, Jasmine." "Are you crazy? That is more money than you make in 2 years. Brad is doing you a favor. He is literally buying your garbage for gold." Beatrice reached out and patted my hand, her touch cold and clammy. "Think of your future, sweetie. Grandpa would not want you to be burdened with that old house. He would want you to have this security. Sign the papers. Do it for us. Do it for peace." I looked from the money to their eager, predatory faces. They thought they were offering me a lifeline. In reality, they were offering me pennies for a gold mine. Brad called it a storage lot. But I knew the truth. He needed that land not for lumber, but because his entire $50 million skyscraper was illegal without it. He was trying to buy an empire for the price of a used car. And the most insulting part was that he thought I was stupid enough to say thank you. I reached out and took the heavy cream-colored envelope that lay next to the open briefcase of cash. The paper felt thick and expensive, the kind used for treaties or declarations of war. The room instantly went silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I could feel their eyes on me. Beatrice was leaning forward. Her breath held her hands clasped together as if in prayer. Ebony was chewing on her lower lip, her eyes darting between the contract and the money, mentally spending her cut. Brad sat perfectly still, like a hunter waiting for the trap to snap shut. I slid the documents out. Standard real estate purchase agreement was printed at the top in bold, authoritative letters. I flipped past the first page, which listed the address of the shack on Miller Road. I skipped the second page, which detailed the purchase price of $50,000. I knew the devil was never in the headlines. The devil was always in the details. I stopped at page 3. Subsection C, paragraph 4. My training as an archivist means I read documents differently than most people. I do not look for what is there. I look for what is hidden. And there it was, buried in a dense block of legal jargon about zoning and easements. The text read that the seller agrees to transfer all rights, title, and interest in the property, including any and all associated assets, holdings, trusts, or financial instruments connected to the estate of Otis King, whether currently known or unknown. My blood ran cold. This was not a standard house sale. This was a dragnet. Brad did not know about the passbook specifically. If he did, he would not be offering $50,000. He would be threatening me with a lawsuit. But he was smart. He suspected that Grandpa Otis might have hidden something else, or perhaps his lawyers had found a vague reference to a trust in the city archives and wanted to close the loop. This clause was designed to strip me of everything. If I signed this paper, I would not just be selling a rotting house. I would be handing over the bearer shares. I would be legally transferring the $50 million deed to the Riverfront District for the price of a mid-sized sedan. I looked up from the paper. Brad was watching me closely, a bead of sweat forming on his temple despite the air conditioning. He knew. He knew this contract was a robbery. "Is everything okay, Jasmine?" he asked, his voice tight. It is just standard boilerplate. My lawyers are very thorough. You do not need to worry about the legal mumbo-jumbo. Just look at the signature line on the last page. That is where your new life begins. I looked at the pen he was holding out to me. It was a Montblanc heavy and black. He wanted me to use a $1,000 pen to sign away a $50 million fortune. The audacity was breathtaking. I looked at the cash in the briefcase. $50,000. It was an insult. It was a crumb thrown to a starving dog. Beatrice nudged my elbow. Go on, baby. Sign it. Do not overthink it. Just imagine what you can do with that money. You can pay off your student loans. You can get a new car. I looked at the contract one last time. I mentally calculated the difference. 50,000 versus 50 million. They were trying to buy a diamond for the price of a piece of glass. And the worst part was, they thought they were being generous. They thought they were the saviors. I closed the folder slowly, savoring the weight of it in my hands. The realization settled in my chest like a stone. I was not going to sign. But I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to make sure they remembered this moment for the rest of their miserable lives. The heavy black resin of the pen felt cold against my fingertips. I looked down at the dotted line that was supposed to mark the end of my struggles and the beginning of their victory. In my peripheral vision, I saw Brad lean forward slightly, his eyes hungry. He was already spending the $50 million he thought he was stealing from me. My mother Beatrice was practically vibrating with anticipation, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. They were all waiting for the scratch of ink on paper. They were waiting for me to surrender. Instead, I slowly, deliberately twisted the cap back onto the pen. The soft click of the mechanism sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Brad's smile faltered just a fraction. What are you doing, Jasmine? The ink does not flow if the cap is on. I placed the pen gently on top of the contract. Then I reached out and placed my hand flat on the cool aluminum lid of the briefcase. With a smooth, steady motion, I slid the money back across the mahogany table toward him. It made a low scraping sound that seemed to echo off the vaulted ceiling. I have thought about it, Brad, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. And I cannot do it. The air left the room. Beatrice let out a small strangled noise like a balloon losing air. Ebony stopped chewing her steak, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. What do you mean you cannot do it? Brad asked, his voice dropping an octave, the charm beginning to evaporate. It is $50,000, Jasmine, for a teardown. I looked him in the eye. It is not about the money, Brad. It is about the memories. That house is the only thing I have left of Grandpa Otis. I walked those floorboards with him. I sat on that porch with him. If I sell it to you so you can park dump trucks on it, I am selling my history. I am selling the only place where I ever felt safe. I stood up, smoothing the linen napkin and placing it next to my untouched wine glass. I realized in that moment that I was a better actor than all of them combined. I am sorry, Beatrice, I said, looking at my mother who looked like she had just been slapped. I know you want me to have the money, but some things are not for sale. I think I am going to keep the house. I will figure out the repairs on my own. I grabbed my purse and took a step back from the table. Thank you for the dinner, Brad. The beef was excellent. But I think I should go home now. I have a lot of cleaning to do at the property. For a second, nobody moved. They were paralyzed by the sheer audacity of my refusal. They had expected a desperate beggar, and instead they got a woman who just turned down a year's salary. Or at least, that is what they thought. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding a rhythm of triumph against my ribs. I had just declared war, and they did not even know the first shot had been fired. My hand was on the brass doorknob, when the sound of Brad's fist colliding with the mahogany table cracked through the room like a gunshot. The force of the blow was so violent that the crystal wine glasses jumped and toppled over, spilling the '96 vintage Cabernet across the white tablecloth like a fresh arterial wound. Sit down, Jasmine, Brad roared. His voice had lost all traces of the smooth corporate charm he had worn all evening. His face was a mask of red vein popping fury. You do not walk away from me. You do not walk away from $50,000 like you are some kind of royalty. Who do you think you are? I turned slowly to face him. I am the owner of the property you need, Brad. And the answer is still no. Beatrice moved then. She moved faster than I had seen her move in 20 years. She rushed across the room, her heels clacking on the marble. I thought she was coming to de-escalate the situation to calm her husband down. I was wrong. She lunged at me. The slap caught me completely off guard. It was sharp and stinging, the diamond ring on her finger grazing my cheekbone. My head snapped to the side. The room went deathly silent. Even Ebony looked shocked, her hands covering her mouth. You ungrateful, selfish little brat! Beatrice shrieked, her chest heaving. We offer you salvation and you spit in our faces. Do you know how hard Brad works? Do you know what he has done for this family? He put a roof over your sister's head. He pays for everything. And you are going to ruin his deal because of some sentimental trash about a grandfather who never gave us a dime. I slowly raised my hand to my cheek. It was throbbing. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and realized that the woman who raised me had died a long time ago. In her place was this desperate, clawing creature who would sell her own child to stay adjacent to power. I am not ruining anything, Beatrice, I said, my voice dangerously low. I am just refusing to be robbed. Brad marched around the table, ignoring the spilled wine dripping onto his expensive rug. He loomed over me, using his height to intimidate. He smelled of alcohol and aggression. Listen to me, you little ghetto charity case, he spat, pointing a finger in my face. You think because you have a piece of paper you have power? You have nothing. I own the zoning commissioner. I own the safety inspectors. I have friends in the mayor's office who owe me favors you cannot even imagine. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. I do not need your signature, Jasmine. I was trying to be nice. I was trying to handle this the easy way. But if you want to play hardball, fine. I will have that shack condemned by Monday morning. I will have it declared a public nuisance, and I will bulldoze it into the dirt with or without your permission. I will bury that house, and I will bury you in legal fees until you are begging me to take it for free. You are a speed bump, Jasmine, and I never break for speed bumps. I looked into his eyes and saw the truth. He did not just hate me because I was an obstacle. He hated me because I was a black woman who dared to say no to him. He was used to buying us, silencing us, or erasing us. I looked at Beatrice, waiting for her to defend me against his threats. She just stood there glaring at me, her loyalty firmly planted with the man who paid for her lifestyle. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and hit the stop button on the recording app. I did not show it to them. I just slipped it back into my purse. You can try Brad, I said, opening the door, but you might want to check the structural integrity of your own glass house before you start throwing stones. I walked out into the humid night air, leaving them in their cold, beautiful prison. My cheek was burning, but the fire inside me was hotter. They had just given me everything I needed to destroy them. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing the toxicity inside that air-conditioned mausoleum. I walked down the limestone steps into the humid embrace of the Atlanta night. My left cheek was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic heat where the diamond on Beatrice's ring had cut into my skin. I reached up and touched the spot. It tender, likely already bruising. A normal daughter might have collapsed on the driveway and wept. A normal sister might have felt the crushing weight of betrayal. But as I walked past Brad's leased Mercedes and Ebony's orange handbag carrier on wheels, I realized I did not feel sad. I felt liberated. That slap was not a punishment. It was a severance package. It was the final physical proof that I owed them absolutely nothing. I slid into the driver's seat of my 10-year-old sedan. The fabric seats were worn, and the car smelled faintly of stale coffee, a stark contrast to the leather and lavender of the house I had just left. It smelled like freedom. I locked the doors and sat in the darkness for a moment, watching the silhouette of the mansion in my rearview mirror. I could see the shadows of them moving in the dining room, probably pouring another bottle of wine to celebrate their victory, thinking they had scared me into submission. I pulled my phone from my purse and tapped the screen. The audio file was saved. I pressed play, turning the volume up to the maximum. Brad's voice filled the small cabin of my car, distorted but unmistakable. I own the zoning commissioner. I own the safety inspectors. I will bulldoze it into the dirt. It was perfect. It was a digital confession of intent to commit fraud, destruction of property, and bribery. It was not just leverage. It was a nuclear launch code. I saved the file to 3 different cloud servers before I even put the car in gear. My finger hovered over the contact for the city zoning office. I could call them tomorrow. I could walk into the permit office with my deed and this recording and shut Brad down before he laid a single brick. I could stop him from wasting a dime. But then I looked at the passbook sitting on the passenger seat. I thought about the way Brad looked at me like I was a bug he could crush with his wallet. Stopping him now would be mercy, and I was fresh out of mercy. I scrolled down my contact list and found the private number for Mr. Sterling. It was past 9 o'clock, but a man managing a $50 million trust picks up on the first ring. Ms. King Sterling answered, his voice alert. Is everything all right? I can have a security team sent to your location if you feel unsafe. I am fine, Mr. Sterling, I said, starting the engine. But there has been a change of plans regarding the Riverside site. I assumed you would want to file the injunction immediately, Sterling said. We can have the cease and desist order on Brad Wilson's desk by 8 a.m. No, I said, my voice cold and steady as I backed out of the driveway. Do not file anything. Do not alert the city. I want you to clear the title blockage in the system temporarily. Make it look like a clerical error. There was a pause on the line. I do not understand, Ms. King. If we do that, he will start building. He will pour millions into the foundation. Exactly, I replied, turning onto the main road. Let him build. Let him borrow money from every shark in the city. Let him erect a 20-story monument to his own ego on my dirt. You know the law, Mr. Sterling. The doctrine of fixtures. Whatever is permanently attached to the land becomes the property of the landowner. I could practically hear Sterling smiling through the phone. You want him to pay for the construction of your building, he said, sounding impressed. I want him to pay for everything I confirmed. Let him finish the roof. Let him install the marble floors. And the day he cuts the ribbon, I will come to take my keys. Understood, Ms. King Sterling said. I will remove the red flag tonight. I hung up the phone and merged onto the highway. The city skyline glittered ahead of me, full of promise. Brad wanted a war. He just did not realize he was building the fortress that I would eventually rule. The next 6 months were a masterclass in patience. I became a ghost in my own city, watching from the shadows as the seasons changed from the humid oppression of August to the crisp, cold bite of February. While I continued to drive my battered sedan and live in my cramped apartment, Brad was living in a high-velocity fantasy world of his own creation. He thought he had won. He thought his threats had scared me into submission, or that his political cronies had magically erased the title issue at the city office. He had no idea that the red flag on the deed had been lifted not by his corruption, but by my permission. The Riverside Luxury Project rose from the marshland like a glistening steel monster. I often parked my car across the river at night, eating takeout in the dark, watching the welding sparks cascade down the skeleton of the building like fireworks. To anyone else, it looked like progress. To me, it looked like a bank deposit. Every steel beam was a bone in the body of my revenge. Every truckload of concrete was another layer of weight that would eventually crush him. Brad was not just building, he was bleeding money. Through Mr. Sterling, I kept tabs on the financial side of the project. Brad was manic. He was so confident in the projected profits that he stopped being careful. He leveraged everything he had. He took out mezzanine loans with interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. He remortgaged his own mansion, the very one I had walked out of. He even drained Ebony's personal savings accounts, convincing her that it was a temporary investment that would double by spring. He spared no expense. He imported marble from Italy for the lobby. He installed smart glass windows that tinted automatically with the sun. He landscaped the grounds with mature palm trees that cost $5,000 apiece. He was building a palace on quicksand, and he was doing it with a smile on his face. I saw him on the local news, occasionally wearing a hard hat, pointing at the rising structure, talking about revitalizing the community. He looked tired but triumphant. He looked like a man who believed he was untouchable. My mother Beatrice was always in the background of those shots, beaming with pride, telling reporters that her son-in-law was a visionary. I did not interfere. I did not send a single text. I did not file a single complaint. I let him pour every ounce of his credit, his reputation, and his liquidity into that soil. I waited until the final coat of paint was drying. I waited until the for sale signs went up in the windows. I waited until he had nothing left to give, and the building stood complete, a $20 million asset sitting squarely on land that belonged to the granddaughter of a mechanic he called Trash. The trap was not just set, it was baited, and the wolf had already swallowed the hook. The morning of the grand opening arrived with a sky so blue it looked artificial, a perfect backdrop for the monument to greed that Brad had erected on the riverbank. The Riverside Luxury Tower stood 20 stories tall, a gleaming obelisk of steel and tinted glass that dominated the skyline. A massive red satin ribbon was draped across the front entrance, waiting to be cut. The parking lot, freshly paved and smelling of tar, was filled with Bentleys, Porsches, and limousines. It seemed as if every wealthy socialite, corrupt politician, and investment banker in the city had descended upon the site to drink Brad's champagne and stroke his ego. A jazz band played soft, inoffensive music near the fountain, but the real soundtrack was the clinking of crystal flutes and the murmur of networking. Waiters in white tuxedos drifted through the crowd, carrying trays of caviar and truffle oil hors d'oeuvres. It was a display of wealth so excessive it felt like a parody. At the center of it all was Brad. He looked like he had been injected with adrenaline. He was bouncing on the balls of his feet, shaking hands with the mayor, slapping investors on the back, and laughing too loudly at jokes that were not funny. He had done it. He had built the impossible. He had spent every dime he could borrow, but today he was going to start selling units for millions. He was the king of the city, but the true star of the show, at least in her own mind, was Beatrice. Despite the warm spring temperature, my mother was draped in a massive floor-length white fox fur coat. She looked ridiculous, like a marshmallow dipped in desperation, but she wore it like royal robes. She had positioned herself strategically in front of the local news cameras, effectively blocking Ebony from the shot. She held a glass of champagne in one hand and was gesturing wildly with the other, capturing the attention of a young reporter who looked bored but trapped. "It has been such a journey," Beatrice cooed into the microphone, tilting her head to catch the light. "You know, this land has been in our family for generations. My late husband, God rest his soul, always dreamed of seeing something magnificent here. He had a vision, and my brilliant son-in-law, Brad, he just took that baton and ran with it. We did this for the community. We wanted to bring elegance back to the river." She paused to sip her champagne, making sure the diamonds on her fingers caught the camera lens. "It takes a certain pedigree to execute a project like this." She continued, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You cannot just be a developer. You have to be a visionary. You have to care about legacy. We are just so proud to finally scrub away the grime of the past and replace it with something high class." She was not just taking credit for Brad's work. She was erasing Grandpa Otis completely. She was standing on the dirt he had bought with his sweat and claiming it was her sophistication that built this tower. She smiled for the camera, a wide, predatory grin that showed all her teeth, unaware that the real owner of the legacy she was bragging about was currently pulling into the parking lot, not to celebrate but to collect. The jazz band faded into a respectful silence as Brad stepped up to the lucite podium. The microphone screeched briefly a sharp feedback tone that made the crowd wince, but Brad didn't flinch. He just smiled that practiced shark-like grin that had charmed bankers into lending him millions and charmed my mother into betraying her own father. He adjusted his silk tie, waiting for the applause to die down, soaking in the adoration like a lizard sunning itself on a rock. He looked out over the sea of expensive suits and designer dresses, believing he was the tallest man in the world. "Thank you," he boomed, his voice amplified across the parking lot and echoing off the glass facade of the tower behind him. "Thank you all for coming to witness history." He gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward intimately. "They told me I was crazy." He began shaking his head with mock humility. "When I first scouted this location, do you know what I saw? I saw mud. I saw decay. I saw a forgotten wasteland that the city had turned its back on. People called this the armpit of Atlanta. It was a dumping ground. It was a place where hope went to die." I stood in the back of the crowd, hidden behind a large oak tree, listening to him desecrate the memory of the land Grandpa Otis had loved. To Brad, the marsh was just dirt to be conquered. To Grandpa, it had been a sanctuary. But Brad continued, his voice rising with theatrical passion. "A visionary does not see what is there. A visionary sees what could be. Where others saw a swamp, I saw a skyline. Where others saw trash, I saw treasure." I knew that underneath the grime and the neglect, there was a diamond waiting to be cut, and I knew I was the only man with the sheer will to hold the chisel. The crowd erupted in polite, appreciative laughter. Beatrice clapped the loudest, nodding her head vigorously to the people around her, mouthing, "That is my son-in-law." Brad raised a hand to quiet them. "It was not easy," he said, his expression turning serious. "We faced obstacles. We faced bureaucracy. We faced doubts. But we did not waver. We poured our blood, sweat, and capital into this foundation because we believe in revitalization. We did not just build a condo complex today, ladies and gentlemen. We cured a disease. We took a blight on this community and turned it into a beacon of prosperity." He gestured grandly behind him at the towering glass structure. "Riverside luxury is not just a building. It is a testament to what happens when you refuse to settle for mediocrity. It is a symbol of the future. And as I prepare to cut this ribbon, I want you to remember one thing. We did this. We tamed the wild. We brought civilization to the edge of the river." He stepped back from the podium, beaming as a young woman in a tight dress brought out a pair of oversized gold-plated scissors. The crowd cheered, a wave of applause that washed over him. He looked like a Roman emperor accepting a tribute. He picked up the scissors, testing their weight, ready to sever the ribbon and officially claim his kingdom. He had absolutely no idea that the barbarian was already at the gate, and she had brought the deed to the castle. The gold-plated scissors were poised in midair, the blades millimeters away from slicing through the red satin ribbon. Brad was holding his breath, a grin plastered on his face, waiting for the camera shutters to click. But the click never came. Instead, a low, vibrating hum began to tremble through the soles of everyone's shoes. It was a sound so deep and powerful, it felt less like an engine and more like an approaching earthquake. Heads began to turn. The jazz band faltered and trailed off into an awkward silence. Even the waiters stopped circulating. Brad lowered the scissors, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face as he looked toward the entrance of the parking lot. He expected a delivery truck or perhaps a late investor. What he got was an invasion. 3 matte black Rolls-Royce Phantoms glided around the corner, moving in perfect formation like a motorcade for a head of state. They did not stop at the valet stand. They ignored the security guards waving their arms. They drove straight over the curb, crushing the freshly planted marigolds, and rolled directly onto the red carpet, coming to a halt just 10 feet from the podium. The lead car bore the crest of the First National Trust Bank on its license plate. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like voids. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, murmuring in confusion and awe. This was not normal wealth. This was the kind of aggressive, untouchable power that made Brad's leased Mercedes look like a child's toy. Brad stepped forward, his face flushing red. "Hey," You cannot park there. This is a private ceremony. Get those vehicles off my red carpet immediately. The rear door of the middle Phantom opened. A chauffeur in a pristine uniform stepped out, but he was not the passenger. He stood rigid, holding the heavy door wide. First, a shoe touched the pavement. It was not a scuffed sneaker or a sensible flat. It was a 4-inch stiletto heel sharp enough to draw blood. Then Jasmine emerged. But this was not the Jasmine who had worn a funeral dress to a dinner party. This was not the Jasmine with the messy hair and the apology in her eyes. The woman who stood up from the back seat was unrecognizable. She was wearing a tailored white pantsuit that was cut so sharply it could have been made of glass. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Oversized dark sunglasses covered her eyes, making her expression unreadable. She stood there for a moment, adjusting her jacket, letting the silence stretch out until it was uncomfortable. The wind caught the fabric of her suit, making it ripple like a flag of war. She looked expensive. She looked dangerous. Behind her, the other car doors opened. Mr. Sterling stepped out, followed by 4 men in gray suits carrying thick leather legal binders. They formed a phalanx behind her, a wall of corporate artillery ready to fire. Beatrice squinted, shading her eyes with her hand. Is that Jasmine?" she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Jasmine did not look at the crowd. She did not look at her mother. She took off her sunglasses, slowly folding them with a deliberate click. Her eyes locked onto Brad, who was still holding the scissors like a confused child. She began to walk toward him. She moved with a slow, predatory grace, her heels clicking a steady rhythm on the asphalt. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a clock counting down to 0. She did not say a word, but her presence screamed louder than any megaphone. She was the phantom of their past returning to haunt their future, and she had brought the bank with her. Brad's face twisted from confusion to a mask of ugly, panicked rage. He did not care about the Rolls-Royces anymore. He only saw the sister-in-law he despised walking toward him like an executioner in Yves Saint Laurent. He dropped the gold scissors onto the stage with a loud clatter and pointed a shaking finger at his head of security, a beefy man named Tony, who was standing near the VIP section. "Get her out of here!" Brad screamed, his voice cracking. "Tony, do your job. She is trespassing on private property. Remove her now." Tony and another guard in a cheap, ill-fitting black blazer pushed off the wall and marched toward me. They looked like bar bouncers, heavy-footed and aggressive. They reached out, ready to grab my arms and drag me away in front of the cameras. I did not flinch. I did not break my stride. I did not even look at them. I just kept my eyes locked on Brad. Before Tony's hand could graze the fabric of my white suit, a commanding voice cut through the air like a siren. "Stand down." It was not a request. It was an order. From behind my phalanx of lawyers, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward. He was wearing the full-dress uniform of the Atlanta Police Department, gold badges gleaming in the sun. It was Chief Miller. I had not just hired a lawyer. I had hired the law. Tony froze, his hand hovering in midair. He looked at the chief, then back at Brad, confused. Chief Miller stepped between me and the guards, placing a hand casually on his belt, right next to his holster. "You do not want to touch her, son." Miller said, his voice low but audible to the front row. "Unless you want to be charged with assault on a property owner." Brad's jaw dropped. He leaned over the podium, sweat dripping onto his expensive suit. "Chief Miller, what are you doing? I donated to your re-election campaign. Arrest her. She is crashing my opening." Chief Miller looked up at Brad with cool indifference. "I am here to ensure the peace, Mr. Wilson, and to ensure that the rightful owner of this land can access her property without harassment." "Step aside." The crowd gasped. A ripple of whispers turned into a roar of gossip. Beatrice looked like she was going to faint. She grabbed the arm of the waiter next to her to steady herself, her eyes darting between me and the police chief. I walked past the stunned security guards. I walked past my mother, who reached out a hand as if to stop me, then pulled it back as if burned by the ice in my gaze. I climbed the stairs to the stage. The sound of my heels on the wood was the only sound in the world. I stopped directly next to Brad. Up close, he smelled of fear. He looked at me, his eyes wide, shaking his head in denial. "You cannot be here," he hissed, his microphone still hot, broadcasting his desperation to the entire parking lot. "This is my building. Go back to your shack." I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled all day. I reached out and gently took the microphone from his trembling hand. He was too shocked to resist. I turned to face the crowd, the investors, the press, and my family. I waited a beat, letting the tension build until it was unbearable. "I am sorry to interrupt the festivities," I said, my voice smooth and magnified by the speakers. "But I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding. Brad, you can keep the scissors. But you are standing on my stage." I nodded almost imperceptibly to Mr. Sterling, who was standing near the sound booth. He signaled the technician, and instantly the massive LED screen behind the stage flickered. The beautiful high-resolution rendering of the Riverside luxury tower vanished. The image that replaced it was jarring. It was a blown-up high-definition photograph of the tattered, water-stained Passbook, complete with the mustard stain on the cover and the peeling leather spine. The crowd murmured in confusion. They were expecting a promotional video or a drone shot of the view. Instead, they were looking at garbage. "Does everyone see this?" I asked, my voice calm and commanding, echoing through the speakers. "To the naked eye, this looks like trash. It looks like something you would find in a gutter. And that is exactly where my family thought it belonged." I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at the front row where the press was gathered. 6 months ago, on the day we buried my grandfather, my mother, Beatrice King, snatched this book from my hands. She was standing outside her lawyer's office, terrified that her son-in-law might realize her father was a poor mechanic. She was so ashamed of her history, so desperate to maintain the illusion of wealth, that she threw this book into a public trash can on 4th and Main. She screamed that it was dirty. She screamed that it was worthless. The cameras swiveled in unison, lenses focusing sharply on Beatrice. She was frozen in her white fox fur coat, her face draining of all color, until she looked like a corpse. She tried to force a smile, but her lips trembled uncontrollably. The socialites around her took a subtle step away, distancing themselves from the woman who threw her dead father's keepsake into the garbage. The judgment in the air was palpable. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. She did not know what she was throwing away. "You see, my grandfather, Otis King, was a man who played the long game. This book is not a diary. It contains the original Class B bearer shares for the Otis Land Trust." I turned back to the screen as the image changed to a scan of the interior page highlighting the geological coordinates. These numbers correspond to the exact plot of land we are standing on right now. This entire riverfront district. My grandfather bought this dirt when nobody wanted it. And because these are bearer shares, whoever physically holds this book owns the land. Brad made a choking sound next to me. He lunged for the microphone, but I pulled it away effortlessly. "That is a lie," he screamed, his voice cracking without amplification. "That is a forgery. It is authenticated by the bank," I said, cutting him off. "But here's the best part, Brad. I knew you wanted this land. I knew you were going to build here. And I could have stopped you. I could have walked into the permit office 6 months ago and shut you down." I paused, looking him dead in the eye. "But I didn't. I watched you borrow money. I watched you leverage my sister's savings. I watched you mortgage your own house. I let you pour $20 million of concrete and steel into my soil. Because the law is very clear on this matter. It is called the doctrine of fixtures. Any permanent structure built on land without the owner's consent becomes the property of the landowner." I swept my hand toward the gleaming glass tower behind me. "You did not build this for yourself, Brad. You built it for me. You just spent your entire fortune constructing my inheritance. So on behalf of the grandfather you called trash, I want to say thank you. You have done an excellent job increasing my property value." Brad looked like a man trying to hold back the tide with a spoon. His face was a mottled map of red rage and white panic. He scrambled for the podium again, his hands shaking so violently that he knocked over the pitcher of water, sending a cascade of liquid splashing onto the shoes of the front row investors. He did not apologize. He did not even notice. He reached into his inner suit jacket pocket and ripped out a folded, crumpled document. He waved it in the air like a flag of surrender that he was trying to convince everyone was a banner of victory. "You are insane!" he screamed, his voice shredding the sophisticated atmosphere of the event. "You are lying. I have the permits right here. Look at them. I have the building permit. I have the zoning clearance. I have the environmental impact sign-off. Everything is legal. Everything is signed. You cannot just walk in here and claim land that the city already authorized me to build on. The government signed off on this, Jasmine. The government." He thrust the paper toward the cameras, desperate for validation. "See? Right here. Owner consent. The Otis King Land Trust. It is signed. It is notarized. You are trying to steal my building, but I have the paperwork to prove I had permission." I looked at the piece of paper fluttering in his trembling hand. It was pitiful. I turned to Mr. Sterling and gave a small nod. Sterling tapped his tablet, and the image on the giant LED screen changed again. This time it showed a split screen. On the left was a digital scan of the permit Brad was currently holding, which Sterling had pulled from the public records database. On the right was a scan of the final page of the old, dirty passbook. "Let us look at that permission, Brad," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. I pointed to the screen. "On the left is the document you filed with the city. You claimed you tracked down the trustee. You claimed you got their signature. And there it is. A scribbled, illegible signature that reads, Otis King." I took a step closer to him. The crowd leaned in silent and captivated. "There is just one problem with that, Brad. My grandfather never signed legal documents with his name. He knew that black men in the South were often targeted for fraud. So when he set up this trust in 1965, he established a specific security protocol with the bank." I pointed to the image on the right side of the screen. It showed the signature card glued to the back of the passbook. It did not hold a signature. It held a complex, unique geometric stamp. A triangle inside a circle with the initials TLT. The trust bylaws state explicitly that no land transfer or construction permit is valid without this specific seal. I explained, my voice cold and precise. "The bank never authorized your permit. The trust never authorized your permit. Which means the signature on your document is not just invalid, it is a forgery." The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "You did not just build on my land, Brad. You committed felony fraud to do it. You forged a dead man's signature to the city planning office. That is not a loophole. That is a crime scene." Brad looked at the screen. He looked at the stamp he had never seen because he had never bothered to open the box his wife threw away. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he was going to vomit. He lowered the hand holding the permit, the paper suddenly feeling like lead. He looked at the police chief standing behind me, and for the first time the arrogance in his eyes was replaced by the terrifying realization that he might not be going home to his mansion tonight. He might be going to a cell. The silence that followed the revelation of the forgery was absolute. The only sound was the wind snapping the red satin ribbon that Brad had been so eager to cut moments ago. The paper he had been waving fluttered from his numb fingers and landed in a puddle of spilled water, the ink instantly beginning to bleed. It was a perfect metaphor for his life. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook, but no words came out. His arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind only the raw, naked terror of a man who realizes he has gambled everything on a lie and lost. I stepped closer to the microphone, my voice calm, filling the vacuum of the parking lot. "Now let us discuss the legal ramifications of what you have done, Brad. Because you did not just forge a signature. You built a permanent structure on land you do not own without the permission of the owner. In property law, there is a concept called accession." I turned to the crowd, addressing the investors who were now frantically texting their lawyers. Accession dictates that when a person attaches personal property to real estate in a permanent manner, that property becomes part of the land. It becomes a fixture. You cannot separate this 20-story tower from the ground it sits on. And since I own the ground, the law says I own everything attached to it. I turned back to Brad. He was shaking his head, a desperate denial-fueled whimper escaping his throat. "No," he croaked. "No. That is $20 million. I borrowed that money. I leveraged the house. I leveraged everything. You have to pay me back. You have to reimburse me for the construction costs. That is the law. Unjust enrichment. You cannot just keep it." I smiled, and it was the coldest thing I had ever done. "Actually, Brad, I can. Because you acted in bad faith. You knew the title was clouded. You forged a permit to bypass the regulations. The courts do not reward fraud. You are considered a hostile trespasser. And as a trespasser, you forfeited every single brick, every beam of steel, and every pane of glass the moment you cemented them into my soil." I gestured to the gleaming building behind me. "I do not owe you a dime. I do not owe you a reimbursement. In fact, I could sue you for the cost of removing this building if I wanted to return the land to its natural state. But I am a generous woman. I am willing to overlook the inconvenience. I will accept this building as a donation." Beatrice let out a high-pitched wail and collapsed into the arms of a waiter. She understood. She knew the money was gone. She knew the mansion was gone. She knew the luxury life she had clung to was dissolving like sugar in hot water. Brad staggered back, his legs giving way. He slumped against the podium, gripping it to stay upright. "You are bankrupt, Brad," I said, driving the final nail into the coffin. "You owe the banks $20 million for a building that now belongs to me. You have no assets. You have no collateral. You have nothing but a very expensive suit and a fraud charge waiting for you." I looked at Chief Miller and nodded. "Chief, this man is currently trespassing on my private property, and I believe he has just confessed to a felony in front of 200 witnesses. I would like him removed from my stage, immediately." The reality of his situation did not just sink in. It crashed down on him like the steel beams he had erected on my land. The word bankrupt bounced around his skull, shattering the last remnants of his sanity. Brad looked out at the sea of faces, the investors who were now averting their eyes, the reporters who were zooming in for the kill shot, and finally at me. He looked at the woman he had called a speed bump, the woman he had dismissed as trash, standing there in a white suit, holding the deed to his life. Something inside him snapped. It was visible. His eyes went wide and bloodshot, the veins in his neck bulging like ropes against his collar. The facade of the civilized businessman dissolved instantly, revealing the violent cornered animal underneath. "You stole it!" he screamed, a guttural tearing sound that ripped through the speakers. He did not think. He did not calculate. He lunged. He threw himself across the short distance between us, his hands curled into claws aiming for my throat. The crowd screamed. Beatrice covered her eyes, but I did not move. I did not flinch. I knew something Brad did not. I knew who was standing behind me. Before Brad's fingers could even graze the lapel of my jacket, a blur of blue uniform intercepted him. Chief Miller moved with the terrifying speed of a man who had spent 30 years on the streets. He didn't just stop Brad. He neutralized him. Miller slammed his shoulder into Brad's chest, knocking the wind out of him with a sickening thud. Brad stumbled back, gasping for air, but he tried to swing a wild, clumsy fist at the officer. That was his second mistake. Miller grabbed Brad's arm, twisted it behind his back with practiced ease, and slammed him face first onto the wooden surface of the podium. The impact shook the microphone stand, but the mic itself remained live. The sound that followed was broadcast to the entire parking lot with crystal clarity. It was the heavy, labored breathing of a defeated man, followed by the sharp metallic ratcheting of steel. Click, click, click. The sound of the handcuffs tightening echoed like gunshots. It was the definitive end of an era. The audio feedback whined high and piercing for a second, punctuating the moment. Chief Miller hauled Brad up by his collar. The once proud developer was now limp, his expensive suit covered in dust from the stage, his hair wild, a trickle of blood running from his nose where it had hit the wood. He was not standing tall anymore. He was hunched over, his arms pinned behind him, forced to bow before the woman he had tried to rob. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller said, his voice calm and professional, booming over the speakers. "And I suggest you use it, Mr. Wilson, because you have already said enough to put yourself away for a decade." Brad looked up at me, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down his face. He tried to speak, but only a choked sob came out. I stepped forward, leaning into the microphone one last time. I looked down at him, not with anger, but with the cool indifference of a landlord dealing with a difficult tenant. "Get him off my property, Chief," I said softly, "and take the trash with you." The sirens of the police cruiser carrying Brad away were still wailing in the distance, but they were quickly drowned out by a different kind of noise. It was the sound of a financial massacre. The crowd of wealthy investors who just minutes ago were sipping champagne and toasting to future profits had turned into a mob. The realization that their capital was tied up in a building that now legally belonged to me hit them like a physical blow. The polite facade of high society crumbled instantly. Men in Italian suits were screaming into their phones, demanding their brokers liquidate assets, their faces flushed with the panic of people who had just lost millions. I watched from the stage as a prominent banker, a man who had laughed at my grandfather's name during the presentation, loosened his tie and looked around frantically for someone to blame. There was no one. Brad was gone. The money was cemented into the ground beneath my feet. Near the buffet table, the reality of the situation finally pierced through Ebony's denial. She stood frozen, clutching her orange limited edition handbag like a life preserver. She had emptied her savings. She had maxed out her credit cards to buy a wardrobe for a life she would never live. She looked at the towering building, then at me, and her knees simply gave out. She did not faint gracefully like they do in the movies. She collapsed into a heap of expensive fabric, and despair knocking over a tray of crystal flutes. She sat on the asphalt amidst the shattered glass, sobbing loudly, a raw, ugly sound of a woman who realized she was not just broke but destitute. No one rushed to help her. The waiters were too busy packing up the food before the checks bounced. But the most satisfying sight was my mother. Beatrice had watched her son-in-law being stuffed into a police car, and her daughter collapse in the parking lot, but her primary instinct was self-preservation. She pulled the collar of her white fox fur coat up high, trying to bury her face in the animal pelt. She turned away from the stage, attempting to slip unnoticed through the crowd toward the valet stand, hoping to escape before the narrative shifted. She did not make it. The press pack, smelling fresh blood, abandoned the stage and swarmed her. They circled her like sharks, sensing a drop of blood in the water. Cameras flashed in her face, blinding and relentless. Microphones were thrust at her from every angle, blocking her path. "Mrs. King," a reporter from the city paper shouted, shoving a recorder near her mouth. "Is it true what your daughter said? Did you really throw the bearer shares in a public trash can?" "Mrs. King," another yelled. "Did you know your son-in-law was forging permits? Were you complicit in the fraud?" Beatrice swatted at the microphones, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," she stammered, her voice shrill and breaking. "I have no comment. I am a victim here. I did not know. Let me through." But they did not let her through. They pressed closer. "The deed was in the shoebox," Mrs. King, a cameraman, shouted. "How does it feel to know you threw away a $50 million fortune because you were ashamed of your father?" Beatrice froze. The question hung in the air, stripping her of every layer of pretension she had built over 40 years. She looked around for an exit, for a friendly face, for anyone to save her. But all she saw were lenses capturing her shame in high definition. She was trapped in the prison of her own making, and for the first time in her life, she could not lie her way out. The wall of reporters finally broke, not because they were finished, but because Beatrice clawed her way through them with the manic strength of a woman watching her life burn down. She stumbled up the stairs of the stage, her heels catching on the wood, her white fox fur coat slipping off one shoulder to reveal the sweat staining her silk dress. She did not look like the queen of the river anymore. She looked like a refugee from her own hubris. Mascara was running down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines, ruining the heavy makeup she had applied so carefully that morning. She rushed toward me, her arms outstretched, her face twisted into a mask of frantic, performative grief. She ignored Mr. Sterling, who stepped forward to intercept her. I held up a hand to stop him. I wanted to hear this. I wanted to see exactly how low she would bow. "Jasmine," she gasped, grabbing my arm. Her grip was tight, her fingernails digging into my suit. "You have to stop them. You have to tell them it was a mistake. They are taking Brad away." I looked down at her hands on my white sleeve. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off me one by one, as if removing a sticky weed. I took a step back, creating a chasm of distance between us that no amount of tears could bridge. "He committed a felony." "Beatrice," I said, my voice flat, "there is nothing I can do. The law is the law." She shook her head violently, her earrings rattling. "No, you can fix this. You own everything now. You can drop the charges. You can bail him out. Think of your sister Jasmine. Ebony is pregnant. She cannot raise a baby with a husband in prison. We will be ruined. We will be on the street." The tears were flowing freely now, but I knew the chemical composition of those tears. They were not salty with sorrow. They were bitter with self-interest. She was not crying for Brad. She was not crying for Ebony's unborn child. She was crying because she knew that without Brad's checkbook, she was nobody. She was crying for her country club membership. "Please, baby," she sobbed, trying to reach for me again, dropping to her knees on the hard wood of the stage. "I am begging you. I am your mother. We made mistakes, yes, but families forgive. We can start over. You have the money now. You can take care of us. Just tell the police to let him go. Do it for me. Do it for Mommy." The word hung in the air, grotesque and distorted. Mommy. She had not been a mother to me since I was 6 years old. She had been a critic, a bully, and a thief. I looked down at her huddled on the floor in her expensive, ridiculous coat. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. I expected anger. I expected hate, but all I felt was a hollow, echoing nothingness. The cord had been cut long ago. She just hadn't noticed until the money stopped flowing. I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers so she could see the absolute finality in my eyes. "You want me to save you?" I asked softly. "You want me to use the fortune my grandfather left me to save the man who spit on his name?" Beatrice nodded eagerly, hope flaring in her wet eyes. "Yes. Yes, please." I stood up straight, smoothing the lapel of my jacket. "I am sorry," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the silent crowd watching below. "But I cannot help you. You see, family looks out for family, and you made it very clear where I stand." Beatrice's mouth opened to protest, to argue, but I cut her off with a gaze as cold as the river behind us. "You threw your chance in the trash can, Mrs. Beatrice, along with the only man who actually loved you." I turned my back on her. I did not look at her again. I walked toward the stairs where Mr. Sterling was waiting with the door of the Rolls-Royce open. Behind me, I heard her wail, a sharp, broken sound of a woman realizing that she was finally truly alone. I pivoted on my heel, the movement sharp and final. The sound of Beatrice sobbing behind me was loud, wet, and pathetic, but as I took my first step toward the stairs, the sound began to fade into the background noise of a life I had finally discarded. I did not look back. To look back would be to acknowledge that she still held some gravity in my world, and she did not. She was just a woman in a ruined coat on a stage I now owned. I descended the wooden steps one by one. The crowd at the bottom, the sharks and the socialites who had sneered at my grandfather's name, parted instinctively. They scrambled back, knocking into each other to clear a wide path for me. I could feel their eyes on me. They looked at me with a mixture of naked fear and reverence. 10 minutes ago, I was invisible to them. Now I was the most powerful person in the zip code. I kept my chin high, my gaze fixed on the open door of the Rolls-Royce where Mr. Sterling waited like a loyal sentinel. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume turning into nervous sweat. I could hear the frantic clicking of camera shutters, a machine gun fire of flashbulbs trying to capture the silhouette of the new owner. I did not shield my face. I let them take their pictures, let them put my face on the front page, let the whole city see exactly who had come to collect the rent. I reached the car. Sterling bowed his head slightly, a gesture of genuine respect that meant more than all the applause Brad had tried to buy. "Ready to go, Ms. King?" Sterling asked quietly. "I am ready," I replied. I slid into the back seat. The leather was soft and cool against my skin. Sterling closed the door with a heavy, solid thud that sounded like a vault ceiling shut. Instantly, the chaos of the parking lot was severed. The wails of my mother, the shouting of the reporters, the sirens of the police cruiser, it all vanished, replaced by the hushed, insulated silence of the cabin. I exhaled a long, deep breath that I felt like I had been holding since the funeral. My hands were steady. My heart was beating with a slow, powerful rhythm. The car began to move, gliding forward with the smooth, unstoppable force of a glacier. I looked out the tinted window as we rolled past the scene one last time. I saw Ebony being helped up by a reluctant waiter, her orange bag trailing in the dust. I saw the police car turning onto the main road with Brad in the back, his head bowed in defeat. And I saw the tower. The riverside luxury building stood tall and gleaming against the blue sky reflecting the sun. It was beautiful. It was magnificent. And every single inch of it was mine. I picked up the old tattered passbook from the seat next to me. I ran my thumb over the peeling leather and the mustard stain that had saved my life. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty car. I settled back into the seat as the driver accelerated, merging onto the highway. I watched the wreckage of the Wilson family in the rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until they were nothing but specks of dust in the distance. The war was over. The reign of Jasmine King had begun. The news cycle spun faster than a centrifuge. For 3 weeks, the city of Atlanta talked about nothing else. It was the perfect cocktail of high society scandal, corporate greed, and vindication. Every morning, the headlines grew bolder. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a Sunday feature titled "The House of Cards" that featured a caricature of Brad trying to hold up a collapsing skyscraper with a forged piece of paper. The business channels, usually reserved for dry stock reports, treated the trial like a spectator sport, dissecting every bad investment and every illegal shortcut Brad had taken over the last decade. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. There was no long, drawn-out drama because the evidence was irrefutable. The digital forensic team had authenticated the timestamp on my recording. The city archives had confirmed the forgery of the permit. Brad's defense attorney, a man who charged $600 an hour, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth during the sentencing hearing. I watched the verdict on the television in my new office. The sketch artist captured Brad's likeness perfectly. He looked hollowed out, his expensive suit hanging loosely on a frame that had lost 20 pounds from stress. When the gavel came down, the sound was sharp and final. Judge Patterson did not mince words. She called his actions a gross abuse of the public trust and a predatory attack on private property rights. 8 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for at least 5. The sentence sent a shockwave through the courtroom. Brad collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands, finally realizing that his connections could not bribe a federal judge. But the prison sentence was just the first domino. The real destruction was financial. Within 48 hours of the verdict, the banks descended like vultures. Wilson Development Corporation filed for Chapter 7 liquidation. It was not a restructuring. It was a funeral. The creditors stripped the carcass of his company clean. They seized the construction equipment. They seized the leased luxury cars. They seized the office furniture. The news footage showed a line of moving trucks parked outside the mansion I had walked out of just weeks ago. Men in blue coveralls were carrying out paintings, sculptures, and furniture. I watched as a foreclosure sign was hammered into the manicured lawn where Beatrice used to host her garden parties. The commentator explained that because Brad had leveraged his personal assets to fund the Riverside Tower, everything was fair game. The house was underwater, the accounts were frozen, the dynasty was dead. One particularly satisfying clip showed the auction of seized personal items. Among the jewelry and designer watches, the camera panned over a bright orange, limited edition Hermes handbag. The auctioneer held it up, announcing it was starting at a fraction of its retail price. It was a small detail, but it symbolized the total collapse of their artificial reality. They had built their lives on debt and deception, and now the bill had finally come due. The city moved on quickly, as cities do, but the lesson remained etched in the skyline. The tower stood tall, a gleaming monument to the fact that while a lie can sprint, the truth runs a marathon. The fall of Ebony Wilson was not a tragedy. It was a reality check. While Brad had the luxury of a prison cell where his meals were provided and his schedule was dictated, Ebony was thrust into the terrifying wilderness of the real world. She had no degree. She had no work experience. She had no marketable skills other than spending money that did not belong to her and critiquing the fashion choices of people she considered beneath her. The eviction was swift. The bank did not care that she was pregnant. They did not care that she was a socialite. They gave her 72 hours to vacate the premises. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to call her old friends from the country club, the women she used to sip mimosas with while making fun of the waitstaff. Not a single one of them answered the phone. They treated poverty like a contagious disease, and Ebony was now patient zero. She moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the south side of town, the very area she used to lock her car doors when driving through. But the rent still had to be paid. And so the woman who once claimed that manual labor was for people with no ambition found herself filling out an application at the local supermart. I went to see her once about a month after the trial. I did not go to gloat. I went to verify. I parked my car at the back of the lot and walked into the store, pulling my hat low. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly pale light on the linoleum floors. The air smelled of sanitizer and stale popcorn. I found her at Register 4. The transformation was jarring. Gone were the silk dresses and the customized jewelry. She was wearing a blue polyester vest that was 2 sizes too big, hanging loosely over a faded gray t-shirt. A plastic name tag was pinned crookedly to her chest. Her hair, usually blown out to perfection, was pulled back in a messy, frizzy ponytail. She looked tired. She looked defeated. She looked ordinary. I watched from the end of the aisle as she scanned items for a heavy-set woman with 3 screaming children. Beep. A gallon of milk. Beep. A box of cereal. Beep. A pack of frozen ground beef. The rhythm was monotonous, a drumbeat of mediocrity. The customer was on her phone, ignoring Ebony completely. When the card reader malfunctioned, the woman snapped her fingers at my sister. "Hey," the woman barked, not even looking up. "The machine is broken. Fix it. I do not have all day." I saw Ebony flinch. I saw the flash of the old arrogance rise in her eyes, the instinct to sneer, to talk back, to demand respect. But then reality kicked her in the shin. She remembered that she needed this minimum wage. She remembered that she had no safety net. She remembered that she was no longer Mrs. Brad Wilson, the developer's wife. She was just the cashier at Register 4. "I am sorry, ma'am." Ebony mumbled, her voice small and trembling. "Let me try to reset it." She pressed the buttons with shaking hands, her nails short and unpolished. She looked miserable. This was a woman who had mocked my job at the archives. This was a woman who had laughed at my car. This was a woman who had treated service workers like furniture. Now she was the furniture. I placed a single item on the conveyor belt of the next lane over. I did not want her to see me. I did not want a confrontation. The punishment she was living was far worse than anything I could say to her. She was trapped in the mundane gray existence she had spent her entire life running away from. As I walked out of the automatic doors, I heard the scanner beep one more time. It sounded like the heartbeat of a life that had flatlined. She had not just lost her money, she had lost her delusion. And that was the cruelest loss of all. The soft chime of the private elevator was the only sound in the penthouse suite. I did not turn around immediately. I remained facing the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, looking out over the city that was now illuminated by the twilight. From up here, the cars looked like toys and the people were invisible. This was the view Brad had dreamed of, the view he had stolen money to build, and now it was the view I drank my morning coffee to. I heard the shuffle of feet against the marble floor. It was a hesitant, dragging sound. I turned slowly, setting my porcelain cup on the glass table. The woman standing in the entryway was a ghost. It had been 5 years since the trial, but time had not been kind to Beatrice. It had ravaged her. The blonde dye had grown out, revealing harsh gray roots. Her skin, once pulled tight by expensive creams and treatments, hung loose and papery on her bones. She was wearing a coat that was clearly from a thrift store, missing a button with frayed cuffs. She clutched a plastic grocery bag as if it contained her entire life. "Jasmine." Her voice was a cracked whisper. She took a step forward, her eyes darting around the room, drinking in the luxury she felt she was owed. The velvet sofas, the abstract art, the crystal chandelier. It was a torture chamber of everything she had lost. "Jasmine, look at you. You look so beautiful, so successful." She dropped the plastic bag. It hit the floor with a pathetic thud. Then she did the unthinkable. The woman who used to slap me for slouching, the woman who demanded I address her as ma'am, crumpled to her knees. She crawled forward on the hard stone, reaching out for the hem of my silk robe. "Please, baby. I have nowhere else to go. Ebony can barely feed herself. I am sleeping in a shelter on 10th Street. They steal my shoes while I sleep. It is cold. I am old. I am sick." She looked up, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "I know I was hard on you. I know I made mistakes. But I am your mother. I gave you life. You cannot let me die on the street like a dog. You have so much room here. Just a small corner. Just the guest room. I will clean. I will cook. I will be invisible. Please. I am begging you." I looked down at her. I searched my heart for a flicker of sympathy. I searched for the daughter who used to crave her approval. But that daughter was gone. In her place was a woman who remembered the sound of a passbook hitting the bottom of a trash can. I remembered how she stood on that stage in her fox fur coat and lied to the world about my grandfather. I remembered that she only loved me when she thought I was useful. Beatrice continued to weep, her hands shaking as they grasped at the air near my feet. She was not mourning the relationship. She was mourning the lifestyle. She looked at me not as a daughter, but as a bank vault she was trying to crack with pity. I took a slow step back, moving out of her reach. The distance between us was only a few feet, but emotionally it was an ocean. She stayed on her knees, waiting for the salvation that she had thrown away years ago. I walked over to the sleek minimalist desk that sat in the corner of the room, unlocking the top drawer with a small silver key. I had been carrying this envelope for 3 months, waiting for this exact moment. I knew she would come eventually. I knew that once the money ran out and the friends disappeared, she would remember the daughter she had discarded. I pulled out the thick cream-colored envelope. It was heavy, the paper stock expensive and textured. I walked back to where Beatrice was kneeling and held it out to her. Her eyes lit up with a feral, hungry intensity. The tears stopped instantly. She reached up and snatched the envelope from my hand, her fingers trembling, not with sorrow, but with greed. She ripped it open, tearing the flap in her haste. I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was expecting a check. She was expecting a stack of cash that would let her buy a new coat, get her hair done, and pretend to be a queen again. She pulled out the glossy brochure and the stapled contract. Her smile faltered. She flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Sunset Meadows Senior Living in Arizona." I crossed my arms, looking down at her. It is a 5-star facility, Beatrice. It has a heated pool, a recreational center, and a full-time medical staff. You will have your own private suite with a balcony overlooking the desert. 3 meals a day, prepared by a chef. Laundry service. It is fully paid for. The contract covers your expenses for the rest of your life. She looked up at me, the brochure crumpling in her fist. Arizona. But that is 2,000 miles away. I do not know anyone in Arizona. I want to be here. I want to be with my family. I shook my head slowly. You do not have a family here, Beatrice. You have casualties. I pointed to the contract. There is a plane ticket clipped to the back page. It is a first-class seat. It departs tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. A car will be downstairs to pick you up at 6. But I cannot leave, she stammered, scrambling to her feet. This is my home. Atlanta is my home. No, I said, my voice hard as stone. Atlanta was your hunting ground. And you have been retired. I stepped closer to her, making sure she heard every word. This is the deal. You sign that paper you get on that plane, and you live out your days in comfort and air conditioning. You will never want for food or shelter again. But you will never come back here. You will never call me. You will never contact Ebony. You are starting over as a stranger in a state where nobody knows what you did. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Or you can tear that ticket up. You can walk out of this penthouse right now and go back to the shelter on 10th Street. You can sleep with your shoes tied to your feet and eat soup from a can. It is entirely your choice. Beatrice looked at the brochure, then at the door, then back at me. She realized what this was. It was not a gift. It was an exile. I was not saving her. I was removing her. I was shipping her to the other side of the country to ensure she could never poison my life again. She looked at the luxury surrounding me, then looked down at her dirty coat. She knew she had lost. She clutched the envelope to her chest, a defeated acceptance settling in her eyes. She would take the comfort. She would take the golden cage. Because at the end of the day, Beatrice King always chose the path that offered the softest bed, even if she had to sleep in it alone. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. It was 6 o'clock exactly. I have paid for a lifetime of comfort, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty room. Every meal, every pill, every activity is covered until the day you die. It is a golden parachute, Beatrice, but it comes with a ripcord. I stepped closer, invading her personal space for the first time, ensuring she saw the absolute resolve in my eyes. The condition is absolute. You do not call me. You do not write to me. You do not look me up on the internet. As far as you are concerned, Jasmine King ceased to exist the moment you get on that plane. If you break this rule, if you so much as send a postcard, the payments stop. You will be on the street within an hour. Do you understand? Beatrice stared at me, her eyes wet and venomous. She hated me. She hated that I had the power. But more than anything, she hated that she needed it. She clutched the envelope to her chest as if it were a shield. The car is waiting downstairs, I said, signaling to the security team waiting in the hall. Goodbye, Mrs. King. 2 burly guards in dark suits stepped into the penthouse. They did not wait for an invitation. They moved with professional efficiency, flanking her on either side. One of them reached out and took her arm to escort her out. Do not touch me, Beatrice shrieked, jerking her arm away, though she was careful not to drop the contract. I can walk. I am not a criminal. She turned back to me, her face twisting into a mask of ugly, raw fury. The gratitude she had faked just minutes ago evaporated, replaced by the bitterness that was her true nature. The mask had slipped for the final time. You are a cold-hearted witch. She spat, her voice rising to a screech as the guards guided her firmly toward the elevator. You think you won. You think you are happy. You are going to die alone in this aquarium. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you. He would hate what you have become. I stood perfectly still, watching the performance. It was fascinating. She was hurling curses at me, wishing for my ruin, calling me a monster, yet her grip on the contract never loosened. Her knuckles were white from how tight she was holding onto my money. She was terrified I would change my mind. She was screaming insults with her mouth while accepting charity with her hands. It was the perfect summary of our entire relationship. "Keep walking, ma'am," the guard said, pressing the button for the lobby. "I hope you rot," she yelled, the spit flying from her mouth landing on the pristine marble floor. "You ungrateful, selfish brat. You owe me. You owe me everything." The silver doors of the elevator began to slide shut, slicing through her tirade. I watched her face disappear inch by inch, the anger, the fear, the greed, until finally the doors clicked together with a soft melodic chime. The screaming stopped instantly. The penthouse was silent. It was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a house that had finally been fumigated. I was finally clean. The soft chime of the elevator fading into silence felt like the closing of a heavy book. I stood alone in the center of the penthouse, the silence washing over me not as a void, but as a cleansing rain. I walked back to the floor to ceiling windows. The city of Atlanta sprawled out beneath me, a grid of lights and motion, unaware that the ownership of its skyline had just shifted in a quiet room 20 stories up. I picked up the crystal glass of wine from the table. The deep red liquid swirled, catching the reflection of the city lights. It looked like the blood that connected me to the people I had just exiled. But as I held it, I realized that blood is just biology. Loyalty is a choice. And they had chosen their side long ago. I turned away from the window and walked slowly toward the center of the room, looking directly into the camera lens. I broke the fourth wall, staring into the eyes of everyone who had ever been underestimated, everyone who had ever been told they were not enough, everyone who had been discarded like a used part. My mother called me a monster. She called me cold. Perhaps she is right. But she forgot that she was the one who left me out in the cold to freeze. She forgot that ice is just water that has learned how to protect itself. She wanted forgiveness because she was afraid of the consequences, not because she was sorry for the cause. And that is a debt I am not obligated to cancel. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine. It was rich and complex, tasting of earth and history. It tasted like the dust in Grandpa Otis's workshop. It tasted like the iron in the soil of the riverbank. It tasted like victory. I lowered the glass, my expression unyielding. The world will tell you to be nice. The world will tell you to turn the other cheek. The world will tell you that family is everything. Do not listen. Sometimes the only way to build a future is to bulldoze the past. They looked at a rusted toolbox and saw trash. I looked at it and saw a kingdom. That is the difference between the blind and the visionary. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a gavel strike. Never underestimate the things that look old or broken. The most valuable treasures are often hidden in the dirt. And never ever forgive those who are not truly sorry. They do not want your mercy. They only want your permission to hurt you again. I raised the glass one last time in a silent toast to the old mechanic who started it all. I am Jasmine King, and this is my legacy. I stared into the lens for a heartbeat longer, my eyes clear and dry. Then the screen cut sharply to black. From the darkness, the slow, soulful sound of a single jazz saxophone began to play, winding its melody through the silence, a song of resilience that would play on long after the credits rolled. The story of Jasmine King serves as a powerful reminder that we should never judge worth solely by appearance. Her family saw trash where there was treasure because they were blinded by their own arrogance and greed. It teaches us that true power does not come from flashing wealth, but from knowledge, patience, and the courage to stand up for one's legacy. Furthermore, it validates the difficult choice of establishing boundaries. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Jasmine proved that you do not need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to know your value. Tap the follow button if you believe in fighting for your worth. and share this story with someone who needs to see justice served cold.